Hello, I'm Pete Thompson, Director of Product at Sop & Sop, and I'm joined by a panel of guests today as we discuss the hot topic of EVs, and particularly fleets and how they could transition over to EVs, the benefits. I'm joined by a great panel. I'd like to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Steve Winter, and I've been working with EVs since 2014 and now work as a fleet consultant in the EV product.
Welcome, Steve.
Callum Langan, Commercial Director at Sop & Sop. Got overall responsibility of everything Sop & Sop from a commercial perspective.
Fantastic.
And Joe Sayes, Head of Engineering for Activate Group.
Fantastic. So welcome, everyone. I think we'll start by opening up, obviously, here to talk about fleets. I guess, Steve, with the experience you've had, what would you say to a fleet considering transitioning over to EV from a benefits point of view, the benefits they could see?
Well, it's a minefield, really. There's lots of benefits, and it's ranging from, there's a cost benefit, because as long as you've got your whole life cost modelling numbers correct, then you always see a benefit compared with an ICE vehicle. But there's also benefits for the drivers as well. You'll find that they'll like driving an EVs. The vast proportion have never driven an automatic before.
Okay.
And you just get a lot of advantages from it. And you save carbon as well, which is great if you're reporting that.
Fantastic. And with the benefits, there must become some challenges when you're going through that transition process. So what are the pitfalls or things that fleets should be looking out for?
So there's many challenges and there's many pitfalls to go down. But the one thing advice I would give is make sure you've got your numbers right. Make sure your whole life cost model is right. That transition from ICE vehicle into an EV is right for you at this particular time. It might not be. You might have to wait another couple of years for a product to become available.
Right.
And then you've got to think about how are the drivers going to react, be it a company car or an operational vehicle. And therefore, driver training is critical to get the best out of that vehicle, to get the best range out of that vehicle. And then you're looking at how are we going to charge it? Are you going to use home charging, office charging, public infrastructure, all those sorts of things that you need to consider. And if you use home charging, which is the most cost effective at this moment in time, how do you recompense the driver for using their home electric? So all those things need to be considered.
So it sounds like you really have to get full buy-in from the organisation. Do you find that the challenges differ depending on the vehicle types your fleet might be running, a car, HGV, LCV, how they might work?
Yeah, there are various options you can go through. Company cars are relatively easy at the moment, because the government, the benefit in kind is so low, it really incentivises company car transition, which is quite an easy one to do, or via a salary sacrifice scheme as well. Vans, it's a bit easier as well, because there are vans available that suit the need. The range isn't as brilliant as it would have been on an ICE vehicle at this moment in time. And trucks are much more difficult. Likewise, there's no heavy goods vehicle electric at the moment. And therefore, you might consider just using a different type of fuel. Maybe a biofuel, biogas, HVO fuel, things like that, which will also lower your emissions, but it won't be an EV product. So think about what statement the company is actually making. Are they saying we're going to have a full EV fleet, or are we saying we're going to have a zero carbon fleet, which means you could still use low emission fuels?
And I guess with a lot of fleets, that route optimization is a key topic. Where you're particularly training engineers that go on particular routes, when you're looking to bring EVs in, then you have to take into account the infrastructure. So how does that really play into factor?
So, one of the first things to do is if you've got telematic information to understand what routes the drivers are taking and how many miles they're doing per day. And then back that off against where your infrastructure is. So how are you going to charge that vehicle? It might be that you can just home charge and they can carry on with their route throughout the day and with no problem at all. It might be you have to plan a stop at some public infrastructure, but then you need to understand what the impact of that is in cost. It might be that you're office-based or depot-based and you need to charge at a depot. But it's around looking at the telematic data, how many miles does that vehicle actually drive? Because a lot of people overestimate how many miles they do, and they don't do as many. And then doing some real world testing. Will the vehicle do what we want it to do?
So there's a wealth of information there to consider. I guess, Callum, if you look at it purely from the accident management piece, the bit where we specialise, What would be your advice out there to fleets who are maybe running some EV vehicles, maybe considering a transition? If they're going to look at their accident management provider, what should they be considering as their kind of top of their agenda?
Yeah, I think for me, touching back on some of the points that Steve's made around kind of the switch over, I think from the fleet world, there is not the data yet available to kind of support the fleets to make that decision. I think we've all seen personal lines, the cars switch much faster, where so the fleets are almost having to make the leap without having the data behind it to back it and to support that decision. So when you're considering the partner in terms of accident management, for me, it's about having that infrastructure, the capability and the experience to repair and handle those vehicles. And for me, that starts right at the start of the process, having the system to identify EV vehicles as opposed to ICE vehicles, because the process is very different and the kind of capabilities and requirements within the supply chain is also very different to ICE vehicles. So it's from a accident management perspective, the process is almost completely separate to how you would handle an ICE vehicle and the supply chain as well. So for me, that needs to be considered. And then, the data to support our customers making those decisions need to come to fruition. So having, be able to give customers that differentiation in terms of cost of ownership of an EV versus ICE vehicles, in terms of what types of accidents they're having, what is the average repair cost versus, an ICE vehicle, and really kind of, is there any other nuances, such as do EVs have specific types of accidents as opposed to ICE vehicles because of the demographic of the vehicle? So there's a whole kind of array of items in the mix, and it's having that capability, whether that's system, people, supply chain, or experience in the business to handle it.
And I guess there you touched on a good point. Existing fleet customers, as the amount of data we have in our systems, we should be a first point of contact to be involved in that consultation phase, really, because there's a lot of insight that we could bring to that transition and help the decision. And coming back to what Steve said about depending on your vehicle types, the route you're doing, your accident ratios. So it's almost, we need to be involved in those early conversations and be there to collaborate with the fleets.
Yeah, from a repair perspective as well, I think that's really key. What we can't have or any accident management company can't have a fleet changing from ICE to EV tomorrow and saying we've got 75 vehicles we need to look after without us knowing about it. A little bit of collaboration. This is going to happen at some point. We can make sure the repair network's in place. We've got the right repairers in that M4 corridor for whatever it may be. We've got the structure there to deal with it before it happens, rather than actually have to scramble and try and find these things when it goes live. But that's just simple. Get involved at the beginning. We can work together with everybody to make the right decision.
I think that's a really good point to bring out. It's all about the partnership. So for us, it's about working in customers. We understand it's a journey. We understand that day one looks very different to where you've transitioned potentially the whole fleet. So it's about working together right at the first phase to understand the plan, the roadmap, and building the infrastructure around it. And again, for us, our core business is accident management. We do only do fleet accident management. So the investment for us in terms of the infrastructure to repair, handle, and take ethanol for those types of vehicles is our sole focus.
Exactly. And I think, Joe, you touched on a few things there about the capability. I mean, you obviously work very closely with the repair networks, all our customers. I guess over the last couple of years since EVs have started to come into fleets, and I guess touching on the personal line, so what are you seeing differently in the repair journey with the EVs as opposed to ICE?
Repair journey, I think it's, we need to make it clear from the very beginning that this is constantly evolving. Nothing is 100% right, and I don't think it will be ever. We just have to keep moving with the times. The biggest thing from a repair point of view is the triage at the beginning and putting those vehicles in the right place first time.
Yep.
That the ethanol handlers, are they asking the right questions? Are repairers giving us the right information on what they can and cannot do? Again, it's got to be in the right place. From a fleet and an insurer perspective, I'd much rather we recovered something further afield to get it into the right repair at the beginning than have to do it halfway down the line. You've got customer journey, you've got downtime, you've got VOR, you've got everything like that we have to consider at the beginning. So moving it to the correct place to start with, it's absolutely key. And that's just going to be a question set from these handlers, from the fleet handlers that give us the jobs already. We know exactly what that needs and where it needs to go at day one.
Yeah, and that's about leveraging the experience in the business, isn't it? To identify, what are the questions that need to be asked up front to build that into the system and the processes to ensure it's a first-time right deployment, which I think is where we're getting at as one of the key differentiators.
But once it's in a repairer, in the right repairer, it's fairly straightforward. The vehicles themselves are the same. Obviously, they've got the power sources, they've got the drivetrains, which is completely different. Thankfully, we don't have that much dealing with them yet. I think in the 2 years it's been growing, we've had one battery pack damage. So it's very minor. It's going to happen the more vehicles we get on the road. We know that. But once it's in the right place, the vehicle's been powered down, the repair itself is pretty much the same. Key to key will go up because we don't know if something's got to go to manufacturer for a reset or whatever it may be. And then you're reliant on the manufacturer workloads. You know, a 5-day repair, it might sit for 5 days at Mercedes, for instance, needing to be reset. We don't know. So I think key to key will go up. I think it will balance itself out as it becomes more the norm. But yeah, I think people need to be aware that it isn't going to be, we've gone EV and everything's going to be bang, it's going to be quick, it's going to be instant, because in reality it's not. I'd love it to be, but it just isn't at the moment.
And I guess the health and safety factor of the repair process comes into that as well. So
Yeah.
there's that whole, it's interesting because we talk on the personal line side about the customer engagement, keeping the customer informed. It's the same really in drivers and engineers being fully aware of where the vehicle is in the process, and because of if it is an EV, they fully understand what the ramifications of that being out and off the road.
Yeah, and you could get you know, some light scuffings on a bumper corner or whatever it may be, and you can have a smart repair done on these vans. We know that can happen. Does it need to go to an EV specialist? Probably not. But as soon as you're putting a spanner on something, or you're involving heat, or it's, you know, anything needs stripping, yes, it's EV only. Get it in there. Same with the recovery. We need to be asking the right questions at the beginning on whether we drive something into repair, or whether it needs a full lift, what warning lights are on. It's all these things that we're learning day by day to get that vehicle in the right place first time.
And so, Steve, then we obviously talked about our position as the accident management company there, but as a customer of an accident management company, would you echo the thoughts we're saying there when?
Well, this is a really interesting conversation, because to me, the network is great.
Yeah.
We need to make sure the network works for us. But the all-important thing is fleet utilisation,
Right.
keeping the vehicle on the road. So that's why it's heartening to hear that there's an EV network. All those things are in place because I want to keep the vehicles on the road as much as possible. We haven't got tens or hundreds of vehicles sat spare. So this downtime is really critical, and you need to make sure that the right resource is repairing that vehicle straight away. So it's really good news that they're thinking about fleet utilisation and keeping that vehicle mobile.
So all fantastic information that we've heard there. And I guess, Steve, just coming back to you, we've talked around the challenges, the benefits. If you were to give advice on how a transition could be made easier, where should the fleet start? I mean, we've talked about a lot of different areas that they need to look at, you know, the ROI, etc. But where would you say this is the place to look at first to see if EV is right for you?
Well, for a start, you need to understand what your vehicles are currently doing. So what is their telematic data? You know, how many miles are they doing? Where are they traveling? What's their payload that they need to use? And those sorts of things will give you that insight. And then once you work a whole life cost model up, you'll understand that more. And as we've said earlier on, you know, the information is critical. It's about a relationship. So what are my accident management costs? How much is it costing me to do this? How much is it costing me to service a vehicle? All those sorts of things feed into this model. So understand the numbers first. Buying the vehicle is not difficult.
Right.
Operating it is much more difficult. And that's where you'll start to see the pitfalls.
Yeah. And a question I was going to ask Steve is that given the supply chain challenges of the delivery of new vehicles, you know, many of customers have made kind of commitments in terms of when the EV will be either fully transitioned or transitioned to a certain percentage. Are we seeing, do you think there could be some slippage in those dates because of the supply chain challenge of actually getting EVs?
I think that's a really good point, isn't it? Because everybody there's a lot of companies and a lot of fleets that have made a commitment.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to make a commitment.
Yeah.
It's much more difficult to deliver that commitment.
Yeah.
And it depends what we're trying to transition. So if it's just a car fleet, it's probably quite easy to make that transition.
Yeah.
If it's a van fleet, it's more than possible for 2025 even, but 2030 is very achievable. A truck fleet by 2030 or 2040 is much more difficult.
Yeah.
So I think if you've got a fleet with operating all those types of vehicles, you need to have a very clear strategic plan of how that's going to operate. And we all know at the moment, you know, lead times are pretty long, over a year in some instances. So don't wait for the vehicle to arrive. Do the homework now. Make sure your cost model is in place. Make sure your repair networks, make sure you've trained your drivers on how they use them so that when they do turn up, they're ready to go. So use that time wisely whilst you're waiting for your vehicles to arrive.
And I guess coming back to that, the infrastructure, it's I guess the the strategic rollout plan is very different if you've got drivers where it's allocated and they take their vehicles home versus depot localized operations. I've seen a number of fleets where it's based at depots where they've had challenges with the infrastructure to actually put EV chargers in. And then we've got the other scenario where you've got take-home vehicles where engineers or drivers, etc., don't have the facility, don't have off-street parking to charge them. So I guess that needs to be worked into the plan to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, you need to understand how you're going to charge that vehicle.
Yeah.
And if it's a depot based, how are you going to charge it in the depot? It might mean for some fleets there's a change of contract for their employees that they need to return to a depot to charge the vehicles. But what you need to remember as well is that home charging is via a 7 kilowatt charger. Some of these batteries are much bigger and they need a lot longer to charge. And with the cost of energy at this moment in time, the way you recompense your drivers is critical to get that right.
Yeah, and I guess could the fleet businesses end customers be impacted, or the actual utilisation? And what I mean by that is, if the drivers having to stop and plan in charges, then are they going to be less productive in their day?
So there's no reason why you can't plan the charge throughout the day. I mean, ideally, you want a home charge. That's the cheapest way of charging, and you're doing it whilst your driver's not working. But if you have to use public infrastructure, then you need to plan that in your route. And obviously, as more and more EVs come on the market, it's more and more difficult to find a charger that's available. But if you do find a charger and you can get it on their route, then plan it in with their day. Plan it in with their break, so they can sit on a charger whilst they're having their break. They can have the heating on, the radio on, all those sorts of things, and you make good use of that.
I suppose you could also link that in with the actual repair network. As a fleet, you would know the repair network that your guys would use. You could plan their days round dropping into a body shop here or there, or a dealer that you've got a relationship with. There'd be monetary impact somewhere. But yeah, you'd plan that. There's so many different ways of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, the public infrastructure is expensive and it will get more difficult to use. So why not talk to your fleet management company or accident management company to find out if they've got a EV network of chargers that you could use and benefit. There's lots of ways to look at it, and I think you just need to be creative around how you operate that vehicle.
I think as this conversation develops, the key thing in my mind that keeps them back to is data and really having that reference data. I think, Callum, if I come to you first, as an accident management company there, we're sitting on a wealth of data. It'd be great if you just touch on the kinds of data we're sitting on and how that could help, and the kind of analytics that we can help support a fleet who are in that transition period.
Yeah, and if I kind of circle back initially where we look at the transition with the personal lines, the data is almost there because of the volume of cars on the road. Where the fleets are starting to transition, they've got no data, nothing to start with. It's predominantly commercial vehicles. So for us, it's about we look after circa 200,000 vehicles. So we have a large percentage of data in terms of that transition. So with our kind of overall data, we build a picture of what actually a fleet looks like in terms of the cost of repair, the accident frequency. And what I mean by that is comparing it, are there any differences with the frequency of an accident in ICE and EV vehicles? And also, we've seen trends where fleets have started to hand the EVs out to their better performing drivers. So it does kind of create kind of volatility in that data. And then also the types of accidents. So are EVs more prone to having different types of accidents versus the ICE vehicles? And then we obviously, when you feed back into the cost of repairs, the lead time for repairs, so is there any impact on the actual key to key, because you've got to wait for the vehicle to be to downtime for initially before you can actually commence the repair, and is there any impact on parts? So I think when you then build them together, is EV kind of more cost effective, and are they will they be off the road longer, or actually because they have less incidents than ICE vehicles, and are they kept on the road more, and therefore they don't have as many accidents, so they don't take as they're off the road as more frequent.
I think that's a really good point there about the data and the accident ratios. I mean, Steve, from your experience with the accident management companies, would you echo what Callum was saying there?
Yeah, I think understanding your accidents is critically important to this whole life cost model. As we keep coming back to that whole piece, we were finding we were having less accidents, and believe it or not, this was because our drivers were probably a bit more concerned about protecting their range to get home. So they're probably driving the vehicle a little bit more carefully and things like that. So our nature of our accidents changed.
Right.
So it's very rare for us to run into the back of somebody. People run into the back of us.
Yeah.
So the whole accident management piece needs to be factored into that whole life cost model, because it's critical. And it's silly things like, where is the charge point located? Because, if it's in the front grille, then that's more likely to take a hit as well. And a lot of these vehicles are loaded with tech.
Yeah.
And active braking and things like that are all in there to prevent accidents. But when they do go wrong, they do need recalibrating, and all those sorts of costs can be expensive. So really understanding your accident management costs and the data is critical to that whole life cost model.
Yeah, just going back to that, the repair costs, you're absolutely right. Repair costs on e-vehicles tend to be higher, but it's nothing to do with the fact it's an EV vehicle. It's the fact there's all the other technology on there, because they tend to be high-end cars, vans, rather than your basic Ford Transit, for want of another word. So the cost is higher, but not solely the fact that it's an electric vehicle. But again, you factor all that in, and with the data that we're getting, and we'll just obviously keep churning it out, we can then make informed decisions of what you need to do.
That does present its own problems. With this high-tech equipment, the lead times to get the parts can be difficult. And that's where we found that having that supply of parts and a regular supply with our accident management provider was really worthwhile. Yeah. So we would keep those parts available to us because we knew we were going to need them somewhere.
Yeah. I think that's about, again, utilising the data to identify the fast-moving, reoccurring parts, or not even necessarily fast-moving, the parts that are reoccurring, so effectively creating an actionable insight, proactively then to identify opportunities to prevent elongated key-to-key or vehicle downtime, because you have a solution that you've utilised data to create.
So Joe, if I just come to you again, and if we're looking at our own supply chain and making sure that it's EV capable, but also future-proofing it, what are the kind of things that we're doing today?
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of our repair network are already EV capable, which is fine. There's going to be some which are working towards it, but it's very expensive. And there's going to be some which aren't interested. And we totally accept and agree all of those. It's not a problem. Like I said earlier, it's identifying where we put those vehicles at the very beginning with the EV side of it. Callum, have you got anything else on the repair side?
Yeah, I think in addition to that, so within our group, Activate Accident Repair, so we've invested in our own line of body shops that effectively that are EV ready from day one. So kind of the shell of the build is including that EV infrastructure and capability and experience. So for us, it's about growing that business to overcome the industry capacity challenge, but also as many fleets start to transition to EV, we have that owned insight capacity and capability to repair nationwide.
And we are ready to go from day one, like you say. Great.
And I think the other thing we've touched on in the conversation is the parts element, and obviously part supply challenges. And I mean, Callum, it's probably a good point there to touch on Activate Parts and why that's such an important brand within the business.
Yeah, I think we mentioned earlier about actionable insight, and by having Activate Parts within the group, it gives us the opportunity to identify either long lead time parts by working with the fleets in partnership during implementation, or actually throughout the repair process, if we identify consistent parts that are coming up as on back order parts today, leveraging that supply chain to validate it, and then also if we're seeing it consistently, impress stocking them in so we can get them out on a next day basis. And it's not just that, but it's also leveraging the OEM and non-OEM discounts that Activate Parts hold, but also supporting their fleets in their carbon neutral goals around green parts. So it's one of the kind of biggest areas of opportunity to look at ring fencing territorial loss vehicles, to break them down and utilise them for for green parts. And that's we work with many customers to do that. And of course, you're cutting out the lead times, and it's almost a like for like part of the vehicle you're supplying back in.
And Steve, that must give you comfort as a customer of an accident management company if they've got a part supply solution there that can help.
Well, that's it. It's about vehicle utilisation again, isn't it? It's, have we got the parts? Can we repair it? And how quickly can we repair it? So green parts was always something I was really interested in, because that reduced our downtime. And that vehicle was utilised as much as possible. So having that sort of solution and with parts available is got to be one of the top factors of choosing your accident management provider.
The one thing I just want to finally touch on and open this to everyone really, I think obviously the fleet drivers, engineers, getting their buy-in is crucial to this. So yes, Steve, you got any advice then how, obviously you've looked at your cost model, you've looked at what the vehicles are right for what you're doing, but you've got that driver base there. How do you get them on board early on?
So contrary to popular belief, they didn't always believe what I said. and so the overwhelming beneficial way we did it was to get them in an EV van.
Right.
So we get them driving one, and as soon as they've driven one, they change their opinion. And so, we went down a very easy route. We just got an ICE vehicle and an EV and just got them to drive both.
Right.
Side by side, and come back and tell us what you think. And generally, the reception was really good. They all wanted an EV. And I think we've all driven EVs now and impressed by their performance, they're quiet, they're automatic, and that sort of thing reduces the stress for the driver. So one of the things I would always recommend is get the drivers behind the wheel of an EV, and you'll see that they'll change their mind.
Yeah. And you touched on there, they also started to influence their driving behaviour and the types of accidents you were seeing. So it's a massive
Absolutely.
benefit. Carl, I think you were going to say something there?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, in terms of getting the drivers to buy in. So with ICE vehicles, they have fuel cards, etc. How does that work with if drivers plug in these commercial vehicles in at home? Is there kind of solutions in place to overcome them effectively footing the bill up front?
Yeah, I mean, there's many solutions that you can do that, and you can just recompense them via how many kilowatts they've used. So you can use their smart meter at home to understand how many kilowatts they've used. You can use the telematics of the vehicle to make sure it's charging in the right vehicle, and you recompense them by their energy costs. So it's easily done. It's easy to talk about how it's done. It's much more difficult, because then when you combine that to using public infrastructure and how you're going to pay for that, and we've all seen a wallet full of cards to activate various chargers, and it needs one card to activate the charger at home, and so that probably still needs more development.
Yeah.
But definitely the way you recompense the engineer needs to be sorted out in very early days, because that will be where the drivers are turned off immediately if it hits them in their wallet.
Yeah, completely agree.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a really insightful conversation. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining us today on this. And I think this topic will rumble on for months and years to come. So thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.